All right, the biggest threat is dealt with, though it wasn't really that dangerous. Avada casually conjured a shield charm behind him, effortlessly deflecting the dozens of silent, nonverbal spells hurled his way. He swung his gaze over the battlefield. Crumb had already scored the first kill with a well-aimed stupefy amid the chaos, and Fleur had fully shifted into her Vila form. Flames powerful enough to subdue a dragon roared back to life in her hands, and the wings on her shoulders lifted her into the air. Judging by the power of that silent dark art spell just now, Barty's skill was considerable. He'd only been hampered by his inability to speak the incantation, otherwise he might have given me trouble. Stupefy! 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 More stupefy curses flew from Avada's wand, cutting down a few dark wizards who had attacked him. By now, even the slowest of them realized the champions had become targets. Without communicating, they all turned their wands toward the three younger faces, clearly much younger than themselves, and, seized by an oddly irrational urge, launched their most powerful nonverbal dark arts. They had convinced themselves they were doing Dumbledore a favor, handing over victims to inexperienced novices so the arrogant teachers could suffer the embarrassment of losing their students at the last moment. The thought was absurd, but for some reason it had spread through their ranks like a contagion, making them reckless, exactly the kind of fellows who'd survived the First Wizarding War by shirking responsibility. Avada guessed the gas from earlier had something to do with it. Dumbledore and Grindelwald were old foxes, too skilled at scheming. Stupefy, Fleur was almost charged, and Crumb was preparing something heavy. He needed to move faster. He couldn't let them steal the spotlight. With an apparition, Avada shimmered to the far side of the protective barrier and slipped out of the encirclement. He took in Fleur and Crumb's positions in a single glance. Those two never held back. The dark wizards who couldn't cast incantations wouldn't be able to defend themselves for long. I'm still counting on these three to make their public appearance at the trial, he thought. Nothing can go wrong here. A dull wariness beneath the surge of his mental power prickled at him. He could feel potent magic concentrating at Crumb and Fleur's wands. He made a decision. I originally only planned to open the student's eyes, he muttered to himself, but soul magic is stronger than I expected. Maybe I can give Dumbledore and the others a little taste of soul magic. He cast another shield charm for himself, then turned away from the dark wizards pressing at his back and aimed his wand at the massive barrier that trapped everyone. What is he trying to do? Dumbledore asked, his eyebrow lifting as he watched Avada. He'd passed on Grindelwald's instructions to put on a spectacular final performance so the things they'd secretly arranged would get a boost, and Avada's instantaneous killing of Barty had been surprising. But why aim at the shield? The barrier had been Dumbledore's personal project, its magic amplified by the old wand. He'd spent rare materials and days of work to guarantee the students' safety. It was top-tier protection. It shouldn't be so easily shaken. He'd barely finished the thought when, where Avada's wand met the shield, a brilliant halo bloomed on its surface, spreading rapidly. The previously transparent barrier took on a pale blue sheen and began to hum faintly. Dumbledore almost toppled from his seat. How could this be? Had Gellert slipped him the blueprints? No, Avada had always been talented at probing magical structures. But where had he found the mental strength to unsettle the foundation of an entire shield? Dumbledore had been exhausted when he built it. Could this be a result of studying souls, the secret power of the Deathly Hallows that Gellert had hinted at? Avada, unaware that Dumbledore was tracing his thoughts, felt only the exhilaration of soul magic amplified. His magical senses let him read, at a glance, the sheer depth of energy and the intricate architecture woven into the barrier. Before he mastered soul magic, even making a small breach would have been nearly impossible. Now, Fleur and Crumb are right at the edge of the shield. That makes this easier. Go. The barrier, which had once spanned a field's width, contracted suddenly, catching both Crumb, who had been leaning against it to avoid attacks from behind, and Fleur, hovering and blasting fire into the crowd, off guard. They scrambled to adjust their positions, trying to distance themselves from the receding edge. Then, as if a seam had opened in the wall, a portal ripped in the barrier, and with the shield's further contraction, flung them clean out of its protection. 382. Fully compliant operations. Yes, the move was technically reasonable and didn't break any of the rules. The rules Dumbledore had announced only forbade the champions from directly interfering with or attacking one another. They said nothing about taking control of or manipulating the protective shield around the arena. The rules certainly didn't forbid damaging the venue or the shield. A free-for-all with dozens of combatants was bound to produce stray spells. If any missed spell brushing the shield counted as a foul, who could fight freely? So, since attacking the shield wasn't explicitly prohibited, directly hacking it to push the other champions out of its range could be spun as legitimate. Avada had pulled it off by his own skill. Fleur and Crumb had only been slightly affected, an inevitable consequence in a melee. The judges would understand, right? Dumbledore, what's happening with your shield? Madame Maxime and Karkaroff cried at once. Things had not gone according to the careful justification Avada had rehearsed. Karkaroff and Madame Maxime stared as if they could not believe their eyes. Their fingers trembled as they pointed at the steadily shrinking barrier and at Fleur and Crumb, sitting bewildered on the ground outside it. Their gazes flew to Dumbledore. If they hadn't seen for themselves that the champion had tampered with the shield, and if they didn't trust Dumbledore's character, they would have thought he was openly favoring his own champion and suppressing those from the other schools. Even if Dumbledore's reputation was unimpeachable in most eyes, the shield had been constructed under his supervision, and its failure reflected on him. The thought stung. The White Wizard, who had spent days crafting that ward, and a fifth-year student had cracked it? I have to admit, Dumbledore said at last, forcing his mouth into a smile and pushing his glasses up, this student of mine is rather audacious. But he broke the shield, Madame Maxime snapped. The rules you helped set don't mention tampering with the shield. That's because you guaranteed the shield would be absolutely secure, Karkaroff cut in. You said it couldn't be undone by outside force. Madame Maxime could not contain her indignation. Stop the match and send our champions back at once. I'm afraid that's not so simple. Crouch, who had remained composed, lifted a hand to quiet them. None of the three champions had affected his interests, and the contestant most likely to damage his own reputation had already been put out of the running by Hogwarts' champion. He tilted his head toward the arena. Look at the field. Avada seems to be planning something. Madame Maxime and Karkaroff followed his gaze and froze. The protective dome that had covered an area the size of a stadium had shrunk until it was scarcely larger than a classroom. More than 40 dark wizards, many already wounded and collapsed, were crammed shoulder to shoulder in a space that allowed no movement. Above them, the champion Avada had formed a platform out of the very fabric of the shield and was standing dozens of feet in the air, looking down. His wand traced arcs that sent strange light across the trapped wizards. That champion, he hacked the shield from the inside? Someone whispered. By then, even those watching on the university screens and the live broadcast across the other schools had pieced together what must have happened. If the organizers had trusted that shield to contain dozens of dangerous dark wizards, it had to be sound. If it had somehow been made to fail, then the fault lay with the champion who had undone it. The thought spread through the crowd like wildfire. How had a fifth-year student undone wards set by Grindelwald and Dumbledore? Norberich University's reserve students, elite enough to be on the scene to help maintain order, were even more stunned. They knew the shield was the work of their own vice principal, Gellert Grindelwald, and likely signed off by Albus Dumbledore himself. A few of them stared openly at the arena. He'll be recruited to the university, won't he? One breathed. With that ability, does he even need to come here? That's professor-level power. Heh, another muttered. We've never heard of anyone just ripping through wards set by Grindelwald and Dumbledore together. Unless, remember Professor Belby and Impri? They once broke a werewolf curse even those two couldn't touch. There's been talk Impri's been away, someone said. Said to be ill. He didn't even come to open day. Healing a werewolf and missing events for a cold? He's probably on a secret mission. It's a volatile time. Inside the cramped dome, Avada could not hear the whispers about him. He was feeling every ounce of strain. What he had done was push his mind far beyond its normal limits, using soul-driven force to extend his mental endurance. By trade, he was only just past the beginner auror threshold. The expenditure of power left him heavy with fatigue. Still, the method had worked. "Let's finish this," he muttered to himself. The dark wizards were packed into a space no larger than a few dozen square feet, unable to move. Avada drew a final breath, centered himself, and unleashed the spell he had been constructing. From outside, all that onlookers could see was a blinding red flare blooming inside the dome, so intense it was almost painful to look at, holding for several seconds. When the light died down and vision returned, people saw that the restraining shield had, at some point, been completely deactivated. The dark wizards who had been standing, some wounded, some felled, were now collapsed into a tangled heap, piled into a small mountain of bodies on the arena floor. 383. The old baddie was taken advantage of. It's over. The crowd was still reeling, blinking from the flash, trying to reconcile what they'd just seen. How had all those dark wizards collapsed? What happened to the dozens of vicious dark wizards they'd been warned about? What about the intense, thrilling, decisive battle they'd expected? It just ended like that? Among the bewildered spectators, Fleur and Crumb were particularly stunned. They had been fighting perfectly, and suddenly they'd been thrown back. Then a flash of light, and it was over. What on earth had happened? Ahem. Then I announced that the third task of the Triwizard Tournament is officially over. Dumbledore cleared his throat. His old voice, still a little dazed, carried across Durmstrang. However, since there was a small incident during the match, the judging panel will first pause the scoring and the announcement of results, as well as any commentary on the many surprises and twists in this contest. Instead, we will first inspect the competition facilities to determine any relevant rulings. Please wait a moment, everyone. He lowered his tone and, with the other three judges, stepped down from the judges' dais. Their expressions were as complicated as the audience's. They moved to the edge of the magical shield and turned to Avada, who was still standing on the high platform. "Can you come out yourself?" Dumbledore asked. "Yes." Avada's lips twitched as he met Dumbledore's gaze and the judges' and the two champions' looks, equal parts confusion and resentment. He slowly manipulated the shield, lowering himself, then closed it completely. The dark wizards that had been piled inside like a small mountain suddenly lost whatever restraint the shield had held them with, and they spilled out in a whoosh, scattering toward the feet of judges and champions alike. Silence. Dumbledore's eye twitched, though he forced his voice steady as he looked at Avada. "This shield? You broke it?" "Yes. It didn't violate the rules, did it?" "It seems not. Did you break the shield entirely by your own strength?" Dumbledore probed, a hint of questioning in his tone. "Did anyone else secretly tell you the structure or weaknesses of this shield by other means?" "No." Avada's denial hung in the air. For a moment, he inwardly kicked himself. "Professor, it's fine for others to be surprised, but you seem genuinely taken aback too. Did Grindelwald tell Dumbledore nothing beyond that he planned to enroll at Norberich University? Nothing of Souls or the Deathly Hallows?" Still, there was no time to linger on speculation. "We need to inspect the shield's construction," Dumbledore said. He drew his wand, crouched, and touched the ground. The grass beneath his hand rippled and transformed into countless ropes. They wound out like living cords, binding the dark wizards tightly, neatly packing them, and moving them aside to clear the ground that had supported the shield. Avada's pupils narrowed. That earth had been specially magically reinforced. Even while channeling his soul power, he couldn't have performed such a large, precise transfiguration so effortlessly as Dumbledore had. A sharp reminder that he was still, in the end, a researcher, not one of the great wizards. The other three judges likewise drew their wands and scanned the ground, probing the shield's structure. Avada noticed Barty Crouch Sr. bowing his head and mouthing something as he lifted his wand, whispering a charm into the air. A few seconds later, Ludo Bagman, who had been lying amid the spectators, suddenly vanished without warning. Avada's suspicions were confirmed. Norberich University, a political heavyweight in arithmancy and a power broker at the ministry, would hardly miss a chance to place an insider. The disillusionment charm on that person was far more sophisticated than the elf's own magic. Even Karkaroff and Madame Maxime, who were close to Bagman, had been unaware. Since those Death Eaters had contacted Grindelwald, they must have told him about Barty Crouch Jr.'s existence. Once that was known, it would be disastrous for Crouch Sr., so he had to seek help from the university, and Dumbledore, who already knew of Barty's situation, was inevitably involved. Avada's clone, the Crew Impuri copy left at the university, had not taken part in this plan. This operation hadn't required many hands, and the clone was meant to remain idle unless absolutely necessary. Drawing on it would have risked unstable consequences. That's about it, he thought. After a few more checks, Karkaroff and Madame Maxime lingering as if unwilling to admit defeat, Dumbledore rose. You two must have seen it as well. The shield's structure is exactly as designed. No hidden doors, no traces of tampering or external force. All the alterations originated from within the shield. It's hard to believe, but it's the truth. Karkaroff and Madame Maxime exchanged reluctant looks, then sheathed their wands and stood. They swept Dumbledore and Avada with complicated gazes. You've really taken in a fine student, Dumbledore, Karkaroff said with a sigh, whether of jealousy or resignation. Dumbledore shook his head gently. Enough, Igor. Since no structural faults were found, we can proceed to announce the results. Our students will have many questions. And Mr. Crouch, how is Mr. Bagman doing now? Barty Crouch Sr. asked, his face tightened. He's all right, Dumbledore replied. He's been quietly recovering for several months. Your memory charm did its job. He got off lightly. Crouch's jaw clenched. He got off lightly. Well, Mr. Bagman was misled, but you've also indirectly caused him to suffer, haven't you? Dumbledore said with a half-smile that made Crouch shiver almost imperceptibly. You're right, Albus. Let's go back, Crouch muttered. They moved to depart, the murmur of questions and speculation already beginning to swell among the gathered students and spectators, the strange, unresolved end to the third task hanging over them like a shadow. Not long after, the four judges reappeared on the dais, and the three champions who had just finished the last task stood behind their respective principals. Karkaroff cleared his throat, touched his wand to his throat, and amplified his voice with a sonorous charm. So, based on the observations and evaluations of the judging panel, we will now announce the scores obtained by the three champions in the third task. Each dark wizard defeated counts as 1 point. Durmstrang, Mr. Victor Krum, 2 points. Beaubaton, Miss Fleur Delacour, and... Karkaroff glanced at the other judges, swallowed, and then read the final score with some difficulty. 41 points. There was no argument. If anything, people were surprised that Krum and Fleur had managed to score at all, and friends of theirs cheered just the same. After everything that had happened, it was obvious to everyone that the odd champion from Hogwarts simply wasn't on the same level as the other two. From the opening of the battle until Ken Avada, Hogwarts' champion, took control of the protective shield and forced Fleur and Krum out, less than 10 seconds had passed. That made the kills even more impressive. Several dark wizards hadn't had time to cast Protego. Fleur's 6 points came from her Vila heritage. In under 10 seconds, she activated that talent and unleashed a first wave of power that took out a number of opponents before they could react. Krum, who relied on sneaking and dark arts, was at a clear disadvantage, but none of their feats compared to Avada's 40-plus kills. Karkaroff continued, I hereby announce that the Triwizard Tournament has concluded successfully. Finally, combining the total scores obtained by the three champions in the three tasks. He produced a familiar large box from under the table. Next, the symbol of the Triwizard Tournament, the Goblet of Fire, will announce the champion of this tournament. He opened the box with his wand. Inside sat the roughly carved wooden goblet, its blue-white flames flickering. 3 champions, please step forward and touch the Goblet of Fire with your wands. This symbolizes the official end of your magical contract with it, after which it will reveal the name of the winning school. Karkaroff shot a quick look at Dumbledore. There was no real suspense about who the winner would be. The formal theatrical gesture of announcing a champion on an opponent's home turf made him visibly uncomfortable. Across from him, Avada, Fleur, and Krum stepped forward and raised their wands toward the goblet. Avada noticed, vaguely and without much thought, that Fleur and Krum both angled themselves slightly toward the center as they approached and delayed the motion of extending their wands by half a step. Whatever, Avada thought. He touched the rim of the goblet first. Perhaps they were wary of him now, or perhaps they simply saw themselves more as fellow survivors than competitors. After Avada lowered his wand, Krum and Fleur touched the goblet with their wand tips. The blue flames in the cup flared and then went a deep scarlet, the same color and the same moment everyone remembered from 6 months ago. 3 champions. Step back, Dumbledore waved them away. The Goblet of Fire will make quite a commotion when selecting the winner. No sooner had the trio moved away than the scarlet flames exploded upward into a towering pillar, weaving an elegant, flowing script in the sky. Hogwarts. A roar went up from the students. The more than 20 Hogwarts supporters screamed and cheered. Even former Hogwarts students in the Norwich contingent clapped and shouted for their alma mater. Despite all the earlier chaos, everyone was safe, and the most important thing now was to celebrate the champion. From the Beauxbatons and Durmstrang stands, applause rose too. Respect for the youngest champion, who had, by sheer strength, created such a huge gap. Honestly, we didn't expect anything else, Cedric said, his palms red from clapping. His grin was impossible to miss. None of us thought Ken would lose. Of course not, Baron agreed, relief threaded through his smile. It's not fair to compare him to his peers. Ken's vision is on a whole different scale. The Hogwarts crowd nodded in agreement. He had twice foiled Lord Voldemort's plans. Competing against ordinary rivals was child's play by comparison. After a moment of celebration, someone with a sharp eye suddenly noticed the goblet was still burning. He nudged his friend and pointed. The champion's been announced. Why hasn't the goblet extinguished? It looks like it's getting more active. Before anyone could finish the thought, another pillar of flame shot into the air. Eyes tracked the new column as it carved a second name beside the first. Letter by flaming letter. Letter. The moment the name finished forming, a magnificent gate shimmered into being beneath it. It opened to reveal a familiar hall, and then a dozen faces the students had only ever seen in newspapers materialized within it. Smiling, waving, and then stepping forward as if onto a stage the judges themselves had just provided. Miranda Goshawk, Damocles Belby, Johnson Shafiq, Benjamin Baker, Ignatius Taft. The sight of those well-known faces appearing all at once left the crowd stunned. They watched as the journalists and prominent figures smiled, waved to the assembled masses, and walked up onto the judges' stand together. I know that what happened today might sound bizarre to everyone. None of the 4 judges showed any surprise at the arrival of the uninvited guests. Karkaroff even smiled faintly. Whether it's Mr. Ludo Bagman's betrayal, Professor Dumbledore disguised as Grindelwald, the dark wizards who showed up earlier, Lord Voldemort, or the guests who have come now, yes, in every sense of the word, today will be an extraordinary day. And by extraordinary, I mean far more than the end of the Triwizard Tournament or the capture of Voldemort's remnants. I mean something truly epoch-making. An event whose impact will be no less than the invention of the wand or the signing of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy. We here, and those watching from Hogwarts and Beauxbatons, are the luckiest people alive to witness it. Everything that happened before was merely a prelude. An impact comparable to the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy? The students exchanged bewildered looks. The invention of the wand and the signing of the statute were among the most consequential events in the history of magic. To claim that anything approaching that scale was unfolding now was staggering. Hadn't all the Death Eaters been captured? Surely that was important, but not quite on that level. Might the Ministry be announcing some sweeping new law? Or the 3 schools publishing a revolutionary discovery? Or was this related to that new university everyone had been whispering about? The murmurs died down as Karkaroff continued triumphantly. I would like to invite the headmaster of Hogwarts and an important participant in these events, Professor Albus Dumbledore, to explain the whole story. He patted Dumbledore's shoulder and sat. Dumbledore stood, raised his wand, and projected his voice across the hall. If I am to explain everything clearly, he said, I must first tell our guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang a few things that have happened in Britain, events that are the source of what we've seen today. Lord Voldemort, You have all likely heard the name and know of his deeds, so I will be brief. He was defeated 13 years ago. That defeat should have ended him, but through ancient and evil dark arts, his soul did not pass away. He remained in the world in a disembodied form and has been searching for a way to return. Dumbledore spent a few minutes calmly and clearly recounting the sequence of events. Voldemort's survival after his defeat, his final sealing 3 years ago when he was lured by the Philosopher's Stone, the incident 2 years ago when his followers sent a sentient dark arts artifact into Hogwarts, which led to the Chamber of Secrets being opened. After that, Dumbledore said, those who raised the banner of pure blood supremacy, who harmed wizarding society for their own ends, fell temporarily silent. Yet rumors persisted that they were not idle. The werewolf attack that shocked Britain last year is suspected to have been orchestrated by them. Their silence ended early last year, when they conceived a plan tied to this year's Triwizard tournament. He paused to gather his thoughts, then continued. By then, they had realized that without Voldemort as their backer, they could not achieve their aims. The resolute opposition of the wizarding community, and my own small part in that opposition, left them under enormous pressure. To solve their immediate problems, they devised an absurd plan. In that plan, they sought two things. First, the full resurrection of Lord Voldemort. Second, the elimination of what they considered their greatest obstacle, myself. It was short-sightedness on their part. Had they thought more deeply, they would have seen that the opposition they faced was far broader than anything I alone represented. But since Voldemort's soul was under my custody, resurrecting him and killing me appeared to them as a single solution. To deal with me, they planned to bring my old adversary, Gellert Grindelwald, out of retirement and use him in a trap intended to eliminate me definitively. Avada, standing behind Dumbledore, raised an eyebrow. Don't they understand the history between them? She thought. And besides, didn't they know I still studied under Dumbledore? How could they think to invite Grindelwald so casually? Fortunately, Dumbledore went on, one of my informants, embedded among them, discovered the conspiracy in time. I used the remote location of Nurmengard to construct a counterfeit prison and led them to infiltrate it, where they reached an agreement with the fake Grindelwald I had prepared. The next problem was how to lure me into their trap. Coincidentally, plans to restart the Triwizard tournament were already in motion, so they used their influence to ensure this year's contest went ahead. They incited Mr. Ludo Bagman, who was struggling with debts, to play the role of a victim in the first task, then used Polyjuice Potion to replace him with an imposter, placing a pawn by my side. Yes, the Bagman who betrayed us earlier was an imposter. The real Mr. Bagman has now been rescued. He is recovering, and you should see the story in the papers in a few days. Professor Karkaroff was also one of their recruitment targets. You will have heard rumors casting Karkaroff as a former servant of Voldemort. That rumor tempted some Death Eaters to try to recruit him. Karkaroff pretended to agree, but secretly cooperated with me, Madame Maxime, and Mr. Crouch. Together, we staged a false victory to draw them out and capture them. All of which is what happened today. Avada was stunned. Is this to clear Karkaroff's name completely? She wondered. The explanation barely held together. There were too many unclear details, and how much more they had not been told she could not say. All right, that is the explanation of today's events, Dumbledore said, and his serious expression shifted to delight. He clapped his hands. Now, allow me to briefly introduce an event that will change the entire wizarding world. The world's first magical university, Norberic University, will begin open enrollment today for students from Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang. 386, New Road, Magic, University? Many students, especially those from pure-blood families, had no real idea what the word university meant. Even some Muggle-born students, having been out of the Muggle education system for so long and unfamiliar with how much knowledge the magical world now held, had gradually lost the concept. What is that? A new kind of magic school, someone whispered. But why would they recruit from existing magic schools? Why would people who've already graduated need to keep studying? The Muggle Studies textbook had mentioned the Muggle idea of a university, but in that book, it was almost presented as something for those foolish enough not to manage a levitation charm. something for people who needed more years of schooling. What would wizards need that for? Dumbledore shook his head, half amused, half regretful, before brightening again. It seems there are many questions, and that's exactly why I consider this a breakthrough. You shouldn't be bewildered forever. He stepped back a half pace, making way for a white-haired woman with a healthy complexion. After a brief exchange of nods with Dumbledore and the two other principals, she gave herself a sonorous and addressed the bewildered faces below with a kindly excitement. I have introduced myself once already, and you've seen a preliminary tour of Norberic University's facilities, but since the teachers and students of Hogwarts and Beauxbatons did not witness what happened before, please allow me to introduce myself again. Her clear voice carried through Durmstrang and rang in the great halls of Hogwarts and Beauxbatons. Professors and students who heard her words fell quiet. I am Miranda Goshawk, author of the Book of Spells and the Standard Book of Spells series, recipient of the British Merlin First Class Order and current principal of Norberic University. She continued, eyes sweeping over the students. First, I must offer a somewhat sobering truth to those of you who have not graduated yet. Even if you could memorize most of the books in your school library over 7 years, the knowledge you cram and perfectly recall would still be only the tip of the iceberg of what the magical world knows today. Over thousands of years, wizards have accumulated vast stores of knowledge, technologies, and experience in countless fields. The sheer volume and complexity of that knowledge now far exceed what any single human mind can master. Even a lifetime of study will likely touch only a narrow portion. Many of you in your 7th year may have felt this already. Start a technical position during your internship, and you'll be astonished at how much you don't yet know. The students exchanged looks but did not speak. For most of them, the natural path had always been clear. Stay at your magic school, take your 2 Wesengamot-level exams, receive your certificates, then use them to find a job, preferably at the Ministry of Magic, and work until retirement. The idea of continuing full-time, systematic study after graduation was not something most had ever considered. Many people have believed for a long time that it is premature for a wizard to stop studying at 17 and go straight to work. Wizards often live well over 100 years. The teenage years are when vigor and the capacity to learn are greatest. Plenty of people are content to find a job they can keep until retirement right after school, but at the very least, there ought to be an option for those young people who wish to continue their studies. Led by the former Minister for Magic, Mr. Norby Ridge, and gathering a vast pool of talent, knowledge, and technology, the world's first magical university was established. After his passing, the institution was named in his memory. For decades, the university operated out of the public eye, and students who enrolled were required to sign confidentiality agreements. But that chief obstacle to public recruitment has now been removed, so we have decided to take the opportunity of the Triwizard Tournament to make our first public announcement to the wider community. Avada's eyelids twitched as he listened. She was placing blame squarely at the feet of the secretive pureblood families. No, he thought, it wasn't an unfounded charge. Between this and the matter of Lord Voldemort, the general student body's hostility toward the troublemaking pureblood faction was only going to harden. After this Triwizard Tournament, Dumbledore had dealt another blow to the staunch pureblood contingent. Karkaroff had in effect shed his darker past, Crouch had cleared up his mess, and now the university could reveal itself legitimately. Almost everyone involved had come out ahead. Did those Death Eaters know how useful they'd been? Goshawk went on, a hint of pride warming her voice. Unlike the schools you currently attend, the university is not only an educational institution, but a cutting-edge research center. Here you may freely choose the field you love and are most competent in, study it until you stand at its forefront, and then become one of those extending its boundaries. Experts from different fields will be able to communicate and cooperate to tackle common problems. For example, she said, pausing to let the attention of the audience tighten, not long ago, through the cooperation of wizards with deep expertise in mental powers, vitality, potion-making, curses, transfiguration, and the dark arts, we have taken another great step toward overcoming a long-standing blight on our society, lycanthropy. She let that sink in, watching the astonishment spread across faces. Then, her voice rising, she added, "Thanks to the university's latest achievements, we can now entirely eliminate the contagiousness of the werewolf curse and almost completely control the symptoms of lycanthropy and its frenzies, so that sufferers can be made indistinguishable from ordinary people." This is a placeholder, an attempt to fetch the chapter from h2a/tr-lab.com/novem/novel/3 name. My name is The Unforgivable Curse /chapter 3 following error. Errored with the following error. Error chiggy/novel-5 my name, that was The Unforgivable Curse /chapter 387 service equals I. Failed. The server returned an empty chapter. If you can see the chapter on the original website, please open the URL and try again. It may also be that you're trying to retrieve an AI-translated novel that has not been AI-translated. Secrecy ends. As soon as the words left her lips, silence fell over Durmstrang, and thousands of miles away at Hogwarts and Beauxbatons, so absolute that a pin drop might have been heard. The werewolf curse, the scourge that had plagued the wizarding world for centuries, had it really been quietly solved by a little-known institution that had existed only a few decades? For generations, werewolf affliction had been a persistent wound in magical society, and countless wizards had burned themselves out trying to heal it. Until now, the best anyone could manage was an outrageously expensive potion that could only prevent a transformation once a month. A full cure? No one had dared to dream of such a thing. Many in the crowd instinctively suspected a hoax, but several faces on the judging panel were familiar, chief among them Damocles Belby, the expert on wolfsbane potions. His presence lent Goshawk's words almost instant credibility. "I guarantee this result is absolutely true and reliable," Miranda Goshawk said. "Our team will publish these findings openly. Within a week or so, you'll be able to read the papers in newspapers and academic journals. And that is only the beginning." She watched the students and professors gathered below fall silently under the weight of the announcement, then, with a calm smile, continued to deliver the shocks she had prepared. "This is merely our most important achievement from the past year or two. We have done much more. The misty projection screens you've used to follow the competition, the establishment of the first basilisk breeding farm, and even contributing to the development of the latest broom, the firebolt. Without shame, I can say that the breakthroughs achieved by this university over the past 30 years exceed those of the entire wizarding world in a century. Do you know why? For one thing, we are not superior because our professors are infallible. Though they are outstanding scholars, no one among us claims absolute authority. Nor, as principal, do I claim we have collected every talent in the world. The truth is simpler. Through the structure of a university, we find those who are already gifted and place them where they can do the most good. In Europe, hundreds of wizards graduate from magic schools each year. Aside from a few born to ancient scholarly families or hired by research institutions, most have no opportunity for further study. Countless brilliant minds, full of potential, are forced onto the same unvarying path too early in life. That is a tremendous loss, both for the individual and for magical society. She paused to let the thought settle, then went on. We didn't make people smarter. We uncovered those who were already smart, gave them choices, and guided them into the fields where they could excel. Let children first learn broadly, then choose narrower fields they love and are good at, and repeat this process until they reach their limits. Then they may either convert knowledge into wealth through work or continue to push the boundaries of knowledge itself. The more people who can join this process, the more knowledge will be created and applied, and the better life becomes for everyone. For far too long, magical education has worked against that process. Students lose the chance for further study as soon as they master the basics, before they can make informed choices. Those who drive progress are either permitted access to deeper knowledge but are not necessarily the most talented at it, or they are once-in-a-generation prodigies who try to be everything at once. The many talented but undeveloped minds are buried. Breaking that rigidity, allowing that long-buried social vitality to reawaken, That was the original intention of Principal Norberic Ridge when he founded this university. It is the philosophy we have clung to. Goshawk's voice rose with quiet pride. Norberic University has operated for 30 years. Over that time, we have secretly recruited students and professors, placing more than 500 elite wizards into society who mastered cutting-edge knowledge. They have entered various industries and made enormous contributions. Even beyond our graduates, the university's own research teams have achieved theoretical and technological breakthroughs in multiple fields and opened entirely new areas of study. You have all seen the results in the events you have witnessed before. Because of certain circumstances, until today, the university could only operate in secret. Every new member had to sign a confidentiality enchantment. No one was allowed to disclose the existence of the university without permission. Many of you here, like Mr. Ken, know that step all too well. Today, however, Norberic University is about to enter a new era. She unfolded a neatly creased parchment from the folds of her robe, drew her wand, and a smile brightened the lines around her eyes. With a sudden flare, a ball of fire burst from the wand and consumed the parchment. Her voice carried over the hall with the light of the flames. I, Miranda Goshawk, as principal of Norberic University, and with the unanimous support of the Board of Governors and all of our professors, hereby declare: Norberic University, effective immediately, terminates the enrollment and employment confidentiality charms and formally enters the public sphere. From this moment on, all professors and graduates are free to disclose their affiliation and academic qualifications. 389. Dumbledore's whereabouts, night at Durmstrang. The Hogwarts Express still sat quietly on the grounds not far from the castle, all its windows dark, and Beaubutton's enormous carriage stood nearby. Though the Triwizard Tournament had ended, by a tradition whose origins were anyone's guess, guests from the other two schools were required to remain with the hosts until the end of final exams. Supposedly, it was to improve student communication. Avada suspected it was a stalling tactic by the British Ministry of Magic to keep Dumbledore at Durmstrang a little longer. Their three champions had advanced too quickly. Whatever the true significance of this tournament was, it had clearly grown far beyond the Ministry's expectations. And Goshawk's speech had been broadcast live at Hogwarts and Beauxbatons, recorded, and was due to appear in the Daily Prophet in a few days. Europe, perhaps the wizarding world, would be watching. That publicity would affect Avada too. The university's debut had ridden on his popularity, so he had come to Dumbledore's office. "I knew you'd come to find me," Dumbledore said, smiling through his glasses. He wore a pink dressing gown and a rather avant-garde sleeping cap. Avada sank into the chair opposite him. "Of course, Professor." Avada gave a wry smile. "I'm about to be in the spotlight, and there are a lot of things I don't understand." Dumbledore's smile held amusement. "Who told you to give me such a big surprise at the beginning?" Avada felt his guilt prick and coughed. "No need to be nervous. I didn't mean to pry. This is your future, after all. But tell me, what did you want me to understand by coming tonight?" "Quite a lot," Avada admitted, rubbing his temples. During the day, he had tried again, under the alias Crew Impuri, to find Grindelwald and learn the truth. When he had asked Principal Goshawk whether Nurmengard had been unsealed, her answer had been staggering. "It has been unsealed," she'd said, "but Grindelwald explicitly told us not to ask him questions. He needs to rest." Rest? Avada wanted to know what Grindelwald had been doing in that tower for months, if he lacked the energy even to answer a few questions. Grindelwald refused to speak, so Avada had come to the other person who would know the most. Dumbledore. Goshawk had been willing to answer, but her position limited what she could reveal, and the stack of documents on her desk made Avada reluctant to occupy her time further. After the tournament wound down and the professors of Norberic University dispersed amid continuing publicity, the students' restlessness eased with nightfall. Avada stood once more at the door of Dumbledore's office. Before he could knock, Dumbledore let him in. He had been expected. "Many is right," Dumbledore said, "because even the plan I left for you in the feather was only a small part of this operation." Avada nodded. He had intended to ask first about Peter Pettigrew, but Dumbledore continued as if reading his thoughts. He produced 2 cups of hot tea with a casual flick and took a sip. Is your first question what I've been doing these past few months? Dumbledore guessed. Yes, Avada answered. Dumbledore's tone grew matter-of-fact. It's only natural to wonder. Only one person knew that Professor Moody had been impersonating me here at Hogwarts while I was away. So your suspicion is legitimate. Avada stiffened. Before he could press, Dumbledore went on. During this period, I have been in Nurmengard Castle, impersonating Gellert Grindelwald. Impersonating Grindelwald? Avada's mind went blank for a moment. He'd expected Dumbledore to be connected to Grindelwald's disappearance, but to have spent months in Nurmengard in Grindelwald's place? What was the real Grindelwald doing then? Was he truly broken, or was there some deeper plan? Most of what I said earlier is true, Dumbledore said. Under the influence of the university, certain stubborn pureblood factions secretly contacted Grindelwald, planning to have him deal with me. Under the influence of the university? Avada interrupted. Exactly, Dumbledore said, the mention of the name making him look grave. Johnson Shafik, the chairman of Norberwick University, Shafik's father, used his position to reach out. The Shafik family did not formally join Lord Voldemort's cause over a decade ago, but as one of the Sacred 28, they still carry influence among the old pureblood families. After the Chamber of Secrets scandal and the imprisonment of many key pureblood figures, Shafeke began to gather survivors. He argued that the current pureblood family's interests aligned and they should cooperate, even proposing they unite to kill me and restore Voldemort. More dangerously, he brought them news about Grindelwald. You heard what I said to Alastor on the screen, didn't you? Dumbledore continued. Shafik relayed the same kind of tale. Grindelwald refuses to accept defeat. He's secretly rebuilding his forces in prison, always ready to rise up and overthrow me. He claimed Grindelwald would support them, lend power to eliminate me. That rumor gave those families renewed confidence and a false sense of security. It drew them right into the trap. You weren't part of this plan? Avada asked. No. Dumbledore shook his head. I only learned of these developments and of Norberwick University around Christmas. Before then, I had indeed set certain things in motion, small pitfalls to expose the pureblood families, but nothing prepared me for how effective Shafik's intervention would be. So before Christmas, Grindelwald had been negotiating with envoys from the Pureblood Alliance at Nurmengard, taking the resources they brought to shore up his strength, Dumbledore explained. He even had sparring partners visit regularly to keep him from getting rusty after so long without a fight. Those men worked hard to secure such a powerful backing. Avada's silence said more than words. Now he understood why Grindelwald had refused him access to Nurmengard earlier, because at that time the prison was crowded with members of the pureblood families. 390, pureblood family plan. Then, what about Grindelwald himself? Avada asked after a long moment of thought. Since you've been impersonating Grindelwald in Nurmengard, where is the real Grindelwald now? Did he escape without permission? How could that be? Dumbledore laughed, but his voice was easy. First of all, he can't appear publicly, and I wasn't about to let him out. Besides, he didn't want to leave Nurmengard. That was part of our final agreement, and it's what he's decided. No matter how many contributions he once made, a generation suffered for his wars. That crime can't be ignored. When the conversation turned to that subject, Dumbledore's smile thinned. Before Christmas, he was approached by envoys from several pureblood families. They offered repeatedly to send people to help him escape using Polyjuice Potion, but he refused for various reasons. After I began impersonating him, he never came out of Nurmengard. Instead, he sheltered himself in a hidden dungeon beneath the prison for months. Avada understood why Grindelwald hadn't wanted to meet him. Best not to bother the man who hadn't seen the sun in months. Let him rest. Dumbledore went on, a trace of mischief returning to his tone. And because of that plan, I had the chance to deal with those unsuspecting pureblood families directly. I collected a great deal of incriminating evidence. They poured everything into this scheme: money, assets, contacts. If it were released without restraint, it would rock all of Europe. As for the families who took part, well, no wonder Norberwick University chose now to go public, Avada said, thoughtful. This whole operation could almost wipe out the hardliners in the pure blood faction, couldn't it? Wipe them out entirely would be an overstatement, Dumbledore said, smiling again. But it will take down 8 or 9 out of 10. And this time it's not like the Chamber of Secrets incident, where only the head of a family was implicated. Their properties, the resources they control, the networks they mobilized, the dark wizards they sheltered, most of it will be exposed. Who on earth thought it was a good idea to try and free Grindelwald again? If resurrecting Voldemort angered Britain, Avada said, trying to free Grindelwald would offend all of Europe, perhaps the world. Grindelwald may have been a bit weaker than Tom Riddle physically, but his influence on the international order was far greater. Dumbledore's gaze drifted, the familiar old habit of lingering on memories. Avada hurried to pull him back. So how did they even dare to contact Grindelwald in the first place? Ah, Dumbledore said, that's one of the few things Gellert and I jointly arranged. Please forgive me calling him that. He chuckled with a hint of pride. Actually, the option of contacting Grindelwald was one we deliberately left open for them. To explain why, we have to go back to last year's werewolf attack. The werewolf attack? Avada blinked, remembering the incident that had drawn him to Norberg University. In the original timeline, his impressions of it had been fuzzy. Now Dumbledore's meaning cleared. You're saying the hardline pureblood families were behind that? Dumbledore nodded. They were the hidden backers. They approached Fenrir Greyback, gave him resources, manpower, and the know-how to swell the number of werewolves and make their assaults more devastating. Their aim was to create chaos that would cloak what they were really doing. What were they really doing? Avada asked, frowning. This was something he had never seen in Norberic's intelligence reports. Dumbledore didn't answer directly, but moved the timeline back further. After the Chamber of Secrets crisis 2 years ago, the hardline faction was already badly weakened. They knew I truly intended to sever their influence, not merely threaten it. Voldemort's main body had been captured, the pureblood families were diminished, and public sentiment was strongly against them. Their options were few. They needed another path. It just so happened that the Chamber of Secrets episode also revealed the existence of Voldemort's Horcrux, at least to those who looked for it, Dumbledore continued. Once they pooled their knowledge, they realized Voldemort had more than one Horcrux. If every Horcrux didn't end up in my hands, Voldemort would not truly be dead. That meant they still had a chance to turn things around. The initial point of the werewolf attacks was to divert attention while they conducted a private investigation into the Horcruxes. They already knew about the Horcruxes back then? Avada's surprise shifted to grim understanding. In the original story, Lucius Malfoy's sending of the diary had seemed a lone, reckless act. Here, it had been supported by a faction. With multiple people aware of the diary's nature, it wasn't hard to suspect it was a Horcrux. Old Death Eaters could compare notes, reconstruct Voldemort's words and actions, and even bring Slughorn in for questioning. Piece by piece, they could conclude Voldemort's soul had been split. In a sense, they were even a step ahead of us, Dumbledore said, his expression briefly troubled. If I hadn't received some unexpected help later on, they might have succeeded. They came to the terrible conclusion that Harry Potter was one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Huh? Avada was stunned. Even Voldemort himself hadn't realized that in the original sequence of events. Dumbledore sighed softly. If you connect the dots, the signs were, regrettably, there. Harry revealed his Parseltongue ability himself. For a mixed-blood Potter to speak like a Slytherin heir invited suspicion. Add his survival of Voldemort's attack, the fact he had once seemingly killed Voldemort, and the theoretical instability that multiple soul fragments can cause in a host, these things could be woven together to reach that conclusion. 391. Behind the scenes of the Triwizard Tournament. So, Avada said quickly. So, Dumbledore repeated, nodding. The third plan of the pureblood families you told me about at the beginning of last year, the person they wanted to take away was Harry? That's right. Dumbledore's approval was almost a smile. They sent someone to impersonate Professor Moody and infiltrate Hogwarts, planning to spirit Harry out of Europe on the day of the third task, when everyone at Hogwarts would be distracted by the unexpected incident. Then they'd erase his memory, alter his appearance, and completely transform him into someone else. How ruthless! Avada shivered. If Barty had done something like that in the original story and then erased his own memory of Harry, Voldemort might indeed have become untouchable back then. Fortunately, the person impersonating Moody was my man from the start. Dumbledore's expression flickered, then hardened as if at the memory of something unpleasant. That man was Peter Pettigrew. You may have heard of him. He brought me a decisive surprise and, of course, the current mystery. Mystery? What happened? Avada asked, curious. He had personally modified Peter's memory and had seen him make a vow with Dumbledore. Under such tight precautions, what could have gone wrong? Dumbledore's answer was blunt. He's dead. Dumbledore frowned. I only received the news this afternoon. He died from the backlash of an unbreakable vow, and it was a vow he willingly made with me. For some reason, Avada felt no surprise. Tell me what he did first. Dumbledore sighed and began to explain. This man was believed to have died 13 years ago when Voldemort fell. The story around that time is complicated, and parts of it are still unverified, so I'll skip those details. You need to know that he joined the Death Eaters 13 years ago, then suddenly reappeared last year with a great deal of intelligence on Voldemort and the Death Eaters, including the location of the Horcrux cave. He made a vow with me, willing to infiltrate the Pureblood faction again, to draw out their weaknesses and help eliminate them. Shortly after, he contacted me again and said he'd devised a bold plan. This year's Triwizard Tournament? Avada supplied. Yes, Dumbledore nodded. By that time, the Pureblood faction already knew that Harry was a Horcrux and were planning how to abduct him in secret. Peter, having given them so much information and earned their trust, thought it better to control the situation rather than let them improvise. He wanted to put them on a known, manageable path. That was the origin of this year's tournament. The truth Dumbledore laid out exceeded Avada's expectations. It wasn't what he had specifically tasked Peter Pettigrew with. Avada's instruction had been vague. Find a way to revitalize the dormant Pureblood faction, expose their weaknesses to Dumbledore, and accelerate their downfall. He hadn't expected Peter to seize on the already existing Triwizard Tournament, but in hindsight, it made sense. Restarting the tournament had long been discussed by the three schools, and with recent social stability, it was the right time. The Pureblood faction's aim matched the original story. Take Harry and resurrect Voldemort. Only now the whole faction was invested, not just Barty and Peter, so the scale, resources, and stakes were far greater. Even Dumbledore's life was at risk. Under their operation, the Triwizard Tournament was restored this year, Dumbledore continued, but the venue was moved from Hogwarts to Durmstrang, and unlike past years, the age limit was removed. Dumbledore's voice grew grave. They needed to lure the two most dangerous people, me and you, who possess prophetic ability, out of Hogwarts together, so we wouldn't detect or interfere at a crucial moment. I miscalculated. You were part of their design. And they got you involved by manipulating Ludo Bagman, Dumbledore went on. Bagman had been chosen as a judge, and because of his gambling debts, he owed a huge sum. The Pureblood families approached him with a suggestion. The student who had defeated Voldemort twice should enter the tournament. They planned to bet on him, to fix the odds with Bagman's cooperation. Since he was a judge, he could influence things behind the scenes, and everyone would profit. Under Bagman's influence, you were drawn into the contest, and Bagman himself was abducted by Barty and used as a disguise. And Mr. Crouch? How did he become a judge? His son had been under Imperious control for years, Dumbledore explained. That was something Peter Pettigrew discovered over the last decade. Freeing Barty to play a role in their plan became essential. At Karkaroff's invitation, Crouch agreed to serve as a judge at Durmstrang. Together they staged the Bagman murder. Karkaroff swapped the real Bagman with Barty's appearance, and Bagman took Barty's place under Crouch's Imperious. Avada blinked. So Bagman was made to watch Crouch use the Imperious on him for months? Yes. Dumbledore sounded almost exasperated. Bagman's magic wasn't strong enough to resist Crouch's Imperious even for a moment. Crouch's commands were simple. Stay in the room, be obedient, no talking, no noise, no unauthorized movement. Poor Bagman was under Imperious control for over 3 months without being detected. It wasn't until 2 months ago, when we informed Crouch of the plan, that he realized his son had been swapped. Avada didn't know what expression to show. So in the past 2 months, Crouch has been adjusting Bagman's memories, trying to make him naturally forget to prevent this scandalous episode, which could ruin Bagman's reputation, from being known. Exactly. Dumbledore's eyes were tired. Crouch has been trying to smooth things over, to bury that part of the story. The two sat in the dim room, the gravity of the conspiracy hanging between them. A restored tournament used as a trap, long-planned deception, exploited loyalties, and the fatal price paid by a man who had tried to play both sides. 392. Grindelwald's bargaining chip. Are there perhaps too many people who know about this leverage? Avada took a long moment to organize his thoughts before finally blurting out, "The principals of all three schools know, everyone at Norberich University knows, and even many of the Death Eaters involved in the plan to rescue Lord Voldemort know. So it wouldn't make a difference if Bagman knew, right? Can this really be kept a secret?" "To be honest, yes, it can be kept secret." Dumbledore nodded, a sigh of feeling in his voice. Barty Crouch Jr.'s existence was discovered by Pettigrew. Even among the pureblood families, few people truly know about him. I estimate only a handful of core members are qualified to know that such a companion lies in wait. Others at most only know that someone impersonated Ludo Bagman, but they don't know who it was. You're right that quite a few people know about Crouch's leverage, but this is mainly a matter between him and Norberich University. Karkaroff, Madame Maxime, and I only took half a step back, each symbolically asking for some concessions, simply to do a favor for the university, which represents the future. He continued, Crouch is, after all, a highly respected veteran official, and now he's head of the International Magical Cooperation Department. If he cooperates, it will be a huge boost for the university's recognition in Britain. As for what will happen to Barty after the dust settles, that will be his own matter. Then what do you think he will do, Professor? Avada asked curiously. Surely Barty couldn't stay with Crouch forever? He was much younger than his father. He could outlive Crouch. Who knows? Probably maintain the status quo, Dumbledore said, shaking his head. He is his son, after all. If Crouch truly had no feeling for him, he wouldn't have allowed his wife to switch him out of Azkaban and then supervise him for over 10 years. Right, that's enough about Mr. Crouch for now. Let's go back to our previous topic. Where were we? Oh yes, Pettigrew spearheaded the Triwizard Tournament plan with the Pure Blood faction. Dumbledore smiled that familiar smile again. When I learned of this, my first thought was simple. Since they had already decided to hold it at Durmstrang, couldn't I just go straight to Karkaroff and ask for his cooperation? That was my initial idea. Initially? Avada was stunned for a moment, then something clicked. Did something change afterward? But Karkaroff does seem to be on your side. Wait, is he connected to Norberich University? Quick on the uptake, aren't you? Dumbledore chuckled, pleased at the guess. It was only when I contacted Karkaroff that I realized I was a step too late. At that time, I didn't even know about Norberich University. I simply thought Karkaroff was mobilizing people and arranging things on his own, but I wasn't surprised, because I knew Karkaroff was one of the least willing to see Lord Voldemort return. As principal of Durmstrang and an old Death Eater, he had channels of information that allowed him to learn some of what was happening in Britain. So what did he do? He proactively reached out to the Pure Blood faction in Britain and offered his help. Dumbledore chuckled again. To make his involvement seem natural and credible, he even spread murmurings within the school that his position had been shaken in recent years, and he was unstable, so he needed external support. Those purebloods didn't expect that a man who had betrayed them once would now share common interests with them again. And just like that, I gained an important source of intelligence besides Pettigrew. I had infiltrated 2/3 of the secret alliance formed by the stubborn pureblood faction. Only 2/3? Avada was surprised. The plan's proposer and core executor were already Dumbledore's people. How much more could he possibly infiltrate? Those pure-blood families aren't fools, after all. Dumbledore explained slowly. Pettigrew's standing among them was never high, and no one knew what he did during the 13 years he disappeared. Karkaroff had betrayed them once. Even if their contributions this time were significant, they couldn't gain absolute trust. And the pureblood faction itself wasn't idle. For example, the fact that Harry was a Horcrux was something they actively investigated, and at that time they still held many secrets. So the remaining one-third, Avada began, fitting the clues together, following Dumbledore's line of thought. That was the result of my visit to Grindelwald, Dumbledore said. He smiled. It was then that I officially learned the name Norberic University and realized that my old friend had given me yet another unexpected surprise. At his urging, the chairman of Norberic University, Johnson Shafiq, one of the Sacred 28, approached the core hardliners and introduced them to a powerful organization secretly established by Grindelwald, whose influence has already spread throughout Britain. He offered them support in their plan to defeat me completely. The Pure-Blood faction believed they had secured Grindelwald's agreement, and Grindelwald consequently learned their whole plan. And this is what you told us at the beginning of the year, the 3 objectives behind restarting the Triwizard Tournament. First, rescue Barty, have him replace Bagman as a judge, and then, together with Karkaroff, tamper with the competition. As I told you when I handed you the feather, they plan to sabotage the ghost ship and, by adjusting scores, get the champions to board it at the same time, forcing me to expend energy to save them. Second, secretly cooperate with Grindelwald, provide him resources to regain strength, and make him the main force against me. In their plan, I would be exhausted from breaking the ghost ship's magic, and a revitalized Grindelwald would be able to defeat me. Not only would they remove their greatest obstacle, they would also get Lord Voldemort's principal Horcrux from me, accomplishing everything at once. And the third objective was an insurance policy. Pettigrew, disguised as Moody, would steal Harry. Even if they failed this time, Lord Voldemort would never be fully eradicated. He would remain an indestructible hidden danger. You learned all of this from Grindelwald, and then, in cooperation with Pettigrew and Karkaroff, you turned the tables and lured them out? Exactly, but there was one missing step in between. Dumbledore's smile became wry. After the meeting, Grindelwald didn't hand over all the information outright. Instead, he used it as leverage. He demanded that I cooperate with Norberic University. 393. Return the Horcrux. This was very much like Grindelwald. Avada kept the thought to himself. It was best not to tell Dumbledore about his connection with Grindelwald yet. It would not be easy to explain, unless he admitted he was already a professor at Norberic University. Of course I didn't drop my guard entirely, Dumbledore said. Seeing Avada's silence, his voice dropped a notch. I would not lightly trust an organization that has ties to Grindelwald. Gaining support with grand, vague promises is one of his specialties. I fell for it once in my youth and paid dearly. From my trip to Nurmengard before Christmas until the time I officially began impersonating Grindelwald, I spent 2 full months investigating Norberic University, judging whether it really was what Grindelwald claimed. And what did you conclude? Avada asked, trying to sound casual. He was, after all, technically a future student of Norberic and had signed an enrollment contract. He ought to be concerned about whether he'd walked into a den of wolves. Don't you already have an opinion? Dumbledore smiled. Signing a contract with a school that infiltrated Durmstrang without my knowledge would at least show you have some trust in Norberic. And I suppose you were involved with them before now. I've learned that Professor Benjamin Baker, who taught you once, is part of the faculty. Dumbledore did not pry into how Avada had come to be associated with Norberic outside of his knowledge, nor did he move to interfere in Avada's future. Whether that was because he trusted Avada's judgment or for some other reason was unclear. Watching Avada fall briefly quiet, Dumbledore continued, And rest assured, in my judgment, Norberic is indeed trustworthy. Those who founded it are respectable and reliable people, perhaps with the exception of Gellert Grindelwald himself. Miranda Goshawk, Damocles Belby, Professor Baker, and even their founder Norby Ridge, these are all acquaintances of mine. I understand their character and integrity. Once I learned they had established the university, I had very few doubts left. The rest of the time, I used to confirm that they hadn't been swayed or their methods corrupted by Grindelwald. To be honest, after I had finished, I felt a little bitter that they hadn't pulled me in sooner. Avada's lips twitched. He suppressed a retort that came dangerously close to slipping out. "And Karkaroff?" he finally asked, forcing his voice to casual neutrality. "How did he come to be involved with the university?" Dumbledore hesitated, frowning slightly as if choosing his words. "Karkaroff, he's a fortunate man. The way Durmstrang operates, centuries of secrecy, freedom in how knowledge is passed on, autonomy from the ministry and governors, and still achieving international recognition despite a poor reputation, that exactly matched what Norberich needed." Grindelwald, who once studied at Durmstrang and later held sway over much of Europe, knew where Durmstrang was and was able to influence its internal direction. They selected Karkaroff just as he took over the school and was still finding his feet. Karkaroff himself is highly pragmatic. He carries a disreputable past and, as a Briton, had no real roots at Durmstrang. He would not turn away the support that arrived. They established a long-term cooperation. Each got what he needed, and it proved surprisingly effective during the Triwizard tournament. Avada felt a chill. Could this too have been a move Grindelwald made by reading possible futures? For an ordinary seer, that kind of disruption would be ruinous, but for someone like Grindelwald, whose mind could weigh faint probabilities in an instant and whose prophetic talent was unparalleled, it would be an extraordinary advantage. "You know the rest of the story," Dumbledore said, setting down his teacup. "Is there anything else you want to ask?" Avada shifted. "How do you intend to deal with Lord Voldemort?" he asked suddenly. "You haven't dismantled his main soul publicly yet. Is there still a reason to keep it? After the semester ends, I will make it dissipate in front of the reporters so everyone can witness it." Dumbledore smoothed the front of his robes where Voldemort's remaining fragment was likely kept. "Lord Voldemort's final death will have enormous consequences. I intend to use that impact as much as possible. The most suitable time for it is as the final blow to the pureblood faction to utterly shatter their confidence and morale." Avada nodded slowly, then remembered something he had come to give. He reached into his pocket and set several former Horcruxes on the table: the golden cup, the locket, the diadem, a diary, and finally, the resurrection stone. "You can take these back now, can't you? Especially the relics of the founders," he said. "Thank you for returning them, Mr. Ken," Dumbledore said, standing. He fought briefly to keep his gaze from falling straight to the resurrection stone. First, with solemn care, he picked up the cup, the locket, and the diadem, setting them together. He put the diary aside in a different place and finally looked at the ring. His expression lightened somewhat compared to when he had first seen it, as if a weight of memory had settled back into place. He stared at the stone for a long moment and gave a small, rueful laugh. "No matter how many times I tell myself it isn't real resurrection, I still want to see them, even if only once." Slowly, with a shaking hand, he slid the ring onto his index finger. He extended the other hand toward the stone. When his finger nudged the dull gray gem, 3 beams of light sprang into being and coalesced into 3 figures, 2 tall, 1 short. They stood before him, expressionless, as if looking without really seeing. Dumbledore's face crumpled. A hot line of tears slipped down his cheek. Avada watched in silence, feeling the room's atmosphere thicken with something too intimate to enter. Quietly, as if not to disturb the fragile moment, he stepped back, eased the door open, and slipped out, closing it behind him. 394. The Truth About Pettigrew. "I apologize for calling you here at this hour, Sirius Remus." July sunlight poured through the tall windows, brightening Professor Dumbledore's office and throwing the many curious trinkets into sharp relief. Albus Dumbledore sat behind his desk facing 2 familiar figures, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin. Peter Pettigrew's death from the backlash of the Unbreakable Vow had come as a shock to many, but in the end, it was the key to clearing Sirius. If the Wizengamot had been even slightly more thorough when they tried him 13 years ago, they would never have branded him a Death Eater and sent him to Azkaban. Pettigrew's recently exposed corpse, combined with Dumbledore's influence, had been enough to overturn the old verdict. Exonerating Sirius had been painfully easy. Once his name was cleared, he was finally able to reunite with his godson. And after Dumbledore personally destroyed Voldemort's piece of soul, The protective magic on Harry no longer required the boy to remain with the Dursleys to recharge. Harry's life brightened quickly, and his relationship with Sirius healed in short order. Lupin had returned to Hogwarts at Dumbledore's invitation to resume his post as Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts. As Dumbledore had suspected, Voldemort's death had put an end to the long-standing curse on that chair. Magical inquiry showed the curse had been bound to Voldemort himself. In essence, he had cursed Tom Riddle to be the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor at Hogwarts. By virtue of his power, he had been able to shift the curse onto successive professors whenever he chose not to take the post himself, which explained the string of ill-fated teachers. The Philosopher's Stone year, when Quirinus Quirrell sat nervously at that desk with Voldemort attached to the back of his head, was an odd exception, but ultimately the curse boomeranged back to its source. Once Voldemort's soul was gone, the curse dissipated. With the werewolf affliction cured by surgical means, Lupin no longer had to fear harming his students and could teach without reservation. "It's my duty, Professor," Sirius said, grinning. "Besides, now that I'm on the school board, I'd have to get back to Hogwarts sooner or later, and Moonface will need to reacquaint himself with life as a professor." "Very well, so long as I haven't detained you. How is Harry?" Dumbledore asked. Sirius brightened at the mention of his godson. "He's doing splendidly. After he left those awful muggles, he looks so much healthier. He's still not used to the house yet. He spent almost a third of the holiday over at Mr. Weasley's, and I've been invited along for a few meals." "You'll have to keep him in line a little," Remus said with a smile. "He has OWLs next year. For his future, you should push him. Wizarding examinations don't hold the same weight they used to, but they matter." Sirius waved a hand. "Why worry about that? Exams won't teach him to play Seeker. He wants a career as a professional Seeker right now. If he changes his mind later, universities have their own entrance exams." Dumbledore cleared his throat twice to draw their attention. "The real reason I asked you here today is to tell you that the investigation into Peter Pettigrew has concluded." "Peter?" The light drained from both men's faces. Amusement was gone, replaced by something like dread. "What did you find?" "I'm afraid the results are likely to be the worst of what you feared," Dumbledore said slowly. He drew a stack of papers from beneath his desk and pushed them towards Sirius and Remus. "These are internal Death Eater records from that year, recovered from pureblood families over the last 2 months. Read them." Sirius and Remus took the documents with shaking hands and read. For a long moment, only the dry whisper of parchment broke the silence. Sirius's voice trembled until it nearly failed him. But why, when he looked so?" Words choked off as his chest heaved. His hands gripped the papers like he might tear them apart. Remus clutched his arm, his own face bleak. When they first learned Pettigrew had died from the Vow's backlash, they had steeled themselves for the worst. But seeing the evidence laid bare was another thing. Dumbledore's voice held a sorrow that made the office feel colder. "Your earlier suspicion was correct," he said. "It was Peter who, out of cowardice and a warped appetite for safety, betrayed Lord Voldemort's enemies by selling the Potter family's address to Voldemort." Sirius stared up, eyes burning. "But why? He acted so sincerely back then. He found information for us. He even volunteered to become the secret keeper and to bind himself with the unbreakable vow. Why would he pretend?" Dumbledore sighed. "I cannot say with certainty, but I have a theory. Pettigrew's betrayal sprang from fear and a hunger for protection. After Voldemort's fall, whatever sense of security Pettigrew had enjoyed vanished abruptly. That left him under immense, complicated psychological strain. To cope, he may have constructed fantasies to convince himself he had not truly betrayed anyone, that he was not a servant of Voldemort. Given the fragments of knowledge he had from his time among the Death Eaters, those fantasies could have taken on a veneer of plausibility." He paused, searching both their faces. "Over time, he may have convinced himself so completely that the lies became genuine memory. That is why, when he spoke, he sounded so sincere and even offered the unbreakable vow. But when faced with the prospect of imprisonment again, his original cowardice could have resurfaced. He fled, breaking the vow's terms, and then died from its backlash." Sirius's shoulders shook. So So it was me who caused James's death. If I hadn't suggested changing the secret keeper to Pettigrew. Padfoot, calm down, Remus said quickly, producing a hand and pointing to a paragraph. Look. He pressed a finger to the page. This. Sirius read where Remus pointed. The passage described Pettigrew subtly jinxing Sirius with Confundus to influence his decision about the secret keeper. The document detailed how Pettigrew had been casting Confundus on Sirius in private, part of the Death Eater's plan to ensure the Potter's address reached Voldemort. Sirius went very still, then began to weep quietly, face buried in his hands. Remus moved to his side, helping him to his feet. I think he needs some air, Remus told Dumbledore. When Dumbledore nodded, the two friends left the office. Dumbledore watched them go, then sighed. He extended a finger and brushed it over the paragraph Remus had shown Sirius. The lines describing Pettigrew's use of Confundo lifted away and vanished from the page as though they had never been written. Final chapter, the key to a new era. Have you heard? Barty Crouch Jr. is dead. I heard that too. Apparently he killed himself after watching that live broadcast of Lord Voldemort's destruction. I wonder what Barty's stance was on all this. Do you think he'd have deliberately stopped it? With him gone, our biggest weakness disappears. Will this affect our cooperation? It shouldn't. He was retiring in a few years anyway. Quiet, everyone. The principal is here. At the shout, the professors in the conference room fell silent, straightened, and turned toward the door. Miranda Goshawk, a kindly-faced older witch, pushed it open with a smile and took the innermost chair. Good morning, everyone. Have you all seen the new campus yet? Satisfied? She looked radiant and relaxed, nothing like the haggard figure who could barely leave her office when the university was first announced 2 months ago. The professors who stared back at her were a testament to that transformation. In just a short time, Norberich University had moved out of seclusion into a truly secret but open campus under the sky, and its faculty had nearly doubled. Better still, most of the new hires were not unknowns. Word had spread that after teaching the required courses, professors could spend the rest of their time on independent research with access to professional equipment, and the most promising projects would receive special funding. Distinguished wizards who had already made their names in academia had applied in droves. The university could even be selective. Miranda allowed herself a small smile. Avada, inhabiting Crew Impuri's body, watched the new faces and felt a comfortable satisfaction. With the new faculty, his teaching load, psychodynamics, had been reduced to 3 classes a week. Outside occasional special tasks, the rest of his time could be his own. Grindelwald, however, had assigned him to lead the university's research into the soul, a project that would occupy him. Still, his output would depend largely on his mood and willingness to reveal what he knew. With Dumbledore having donated the Resurrection Stone to the university, Avada felt a strong protective umbrella for any results he chose to publish. When his Hogwarts years were over in 2 years, he intended to find a way for his true body to take over this professorship and enjoy the dual benefits of university salary and Department of Mysteries support. The thought was intoxicating. It seems you were talking before I arrived, Goshawk said, producing several parchments from thin air and laying them on the table. Let's begin the first faculty meeting of the new term. First and most important, the public announcement procedures. Professor Baker, please report. My pleasure. Benjamin Baker stood, smiled, and projected the parchments into the center of the room. As it turned out, the stubborn pureblood faction helped us in unexpected ways. With Barty Crouch's complete flip to our side and several ministry officials whose children were infected during the werewolf attack 2 years ago coming around, the procedural hurdles were minimal. Even Dolores Umbridge, who was most resistant, has had so many scandals exposed that she's too busy to interfere. Public opinion is in our favor. Surveys show that after several hundred graduates revealed their affiliation, the majority of British witches and wizards have tentatively trusted the university. Only a small minority remain wary of a large, unfamiliar organization. In short, our foundation in Britain is solid. In negotiations with the ministry, we secured the main points of our original plan. The campus location will remain confidential. Day-to-day operations will liaise only with the Wizarding Examinations Authority, and not be directly overseen by the ministry. Information below classified level can be freely disseminated, while material above classified level requires special ministry approval, though I don't expect that approval to be difficult to obtain. We have cooperation agreements with the Department of Mysteries and the Auror office as well. Baker conjured a glass of water, took a sip, and continued. Essentially, we've replicated Durmstrang's model. Our one regret is announcing the campuses within Britain. That keeps us tied to the British ministry. But overall, some openness has served us. It helps build prestige. Across Europe, Durmstrang has signed a recommendation agreement with us, Baker added. Bo Bottens is still watching, but hasn't forbidden graduates from attending, and the Magical Congress of the United States seems poised to replicate our model, which is promising. Very good, Goshawk nodded. Professor Belby, report on this year's enrollment. Certainly, we filled all 1,000 available places in this European intake. Only 310 are recent graduates. The rest are adult wizards who passed the university's independent admissions exam. The university is progressing smoothly, Avada murmured to himself in a small, cluttered library in London as he read the dispatches from Norberich. 2 years with the university, and he had been both first-hand witness and key promoter of its most consequential changes. Seeing it thrive felt like watching a child grow up. Relief and pride mingled in his chest. The disappearance of pure-blood obstruction, the opening of controlled knowledge, the newfound freedom for academic research. Everything pointed toward the future. How many years until the fruits of this work reached the rest of the magical world? He hoped to see it within his lifetime, and when that day came, the gift he had prepared for Muggle society might finally play its part. He broke the wax seal he had just affixed to a parchment, then looked down at the paper he had completed, a project he hoped would be a key to a new era, and allowed himself a satisfied smile. The discovery of a new Aranicidae species, tentative name, Spiky Fellow, extracts from its spines, may overturn current chemical understanding. End of book. 396. Final words. I know the ending may feel abrupt, and the book's total word count is a little light, but everything I wanted to say really has been said. The abruptness in the reading experience, however, couldn't be avoided. That was down to my limitations as a writer, problems with pacing and plot development. Only a few days ago, while writing, I realized with a jolt, wait, how did everything get resolved so quickly? At the time, I considered struggling to expand the story, if only to make it through the month and get my full attendance bonus, laughs. But the truth was, there didn't seem to be anything left to say. The protagonist's goal has been achieved, the secret of the Deathly Hallows revealed, Norberich University is up and running, and the pureblood families have been brought into line. If I kept going, it would mostly be about enlarging the scope, first from Britain to Europe, then to the entire magical world, waging a broad campaign against dark wizards and pureblood cabals. That would risk repeating myself, and would demand a level of originality and execution I don't think I'm ready for. Ending here was the most stable choice, even if the reading experience falls short. A few words about how the book was written. This was my first work carried from start to finish, and its current success has surpassed my expectations. At the same time, the more I wrote, the more flaws I found in my own writing, to the point that I felt a little embarrassed by the end. The book itself was born in haste. I started it quickly because of circumstances. Less than a month passed between creating the project folder and uploading the first chapters. When I uploaded, I hadn't finished the outline for the Chamber of Secrets arc. Beyond Norberich University, the plan was mostly a blank slate. At that time, I thought it was enough. Looking back, that was the boldness of ignorance. When the Chamber of Secrets arc was nearing completion, I literally had no drafts and no outline. It was agonizing. I decided to sacrifice the Prisoner of Azkaban arc, sketching a simple main plot, the werewolf attack case, to keep things moving, and I introduced the Norberich University setting to buy time to compose the next outline. That's why, in that phase, there's almost no depiction of Hogwarts daily life. I was focused on driving the main plot, and the writing quality naturally suffered. That's also when average subscriptions first dipped. Within the following month, I finally produced a relatively complete outline for the Goblet of Fire arc. The cost was a somewhat awkward transition. Avada remained in the timeline for over 4 months, and many original subplots were skipped. It was a stiff solution, but the least bad one I could find. Expanding all those subplots properly would have been even more tedious and, frankly, beyond me at the time. Fortunately, the final Goblet of Fire arc is fairly complete and most earlier foreshadowing and plot threads were resolved. The downside was that much of the story took place outside Hogwarts, so a lot of original character development was missing. Overall, the book's biggest problem is fractured pacing. Early on, I didn't lay enough groundwork for characters, world building, and side plots. Outside the main arc, the text often became daily life, and I'm not good at writing everyday scenes. Later, I pushed the main plot aggressively, expanding the world via Norberic University, but then focusing mainly on the intrigues at Durmstrang. That left little space for character development beyond Fleur and Crumb. It's embarrassing, and I'm keenly aware of it. When I first published, I said this book had been carefully planned and that I would be responsible to my readers. In reality, there were major hidden problems from the very beginning. I was ignorant and reckless. Thank you to the readers who stuck with a half-baked newcomer through the whole thing. I'm sorry if I fell short of your expectations. Give me a few months. I'll settle down, summarize everything I've learned over these 6 months of writing, and work on fixing my shortcomings one by one. The next book must not be like this. I originally wanted to say, see you in the next book, but I don't have the nerve for that yet. Until then, thank you all.